If you don't know me, my name is Amanda and this channel is called Novelty Books, and we are here today at 11:38 p.m.
𝒟𝓶 Incorporated.
So let's just say it's like
After hours.
I was getting ready for bed and I sort of had this bright idea of what if I made a YouTube video, but I made it at 9.
I'm working in the kitchen. At night.
Don't hold back.
Hey, Squidward, guess what? I'm chopping lettuce. At night. Look at me, I'm swabbing the bathroom. At night. Ow! I burned my hand! At night. Night, 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 night!
Will you please?
I brewed myself some peach tranquility tea from Teavana. Every time I brewed this, it sort of tastes like peach water, which is kind of gross, but I mean, you know. Also, the mug says cold hands, warm heart. Yeah, it still tastes like peach water. So I do have to watch my own video to remember what books I actually have to talk about. Okay, so we're gonna start with a good girl's guide to murder. I can't like enunciate the title. I don't know why. Okay, so this is my review from Goodreads. This book was honestly one of the first times I genuinely enjoyed a YA novel that did not have an inkling of fantasy on its pages. I wish we got to see more of Pip's good girl side and got into more of her complexities and upped the energy by writing this as Pip being a college student and this capstone project having more substantial weight to it, but regardless, I found this book to be an enjoyable read. I hope to post a video review of it soon. This was in April. But yeah, I mean, I gave it 4 stars. This review sort of holds up still, but I think I didn't really go into what I liked about the book at all, which is classic me. This was another book club read. It was picked by my mom. So my first note is kind of wish the main character was a college student so it could feel a bit more realistic and adult, more complex because she had to come back from her uni to her hometown and figure this out. I don't know. I guess this was just my problem with the book itself. It felt sort of juvenile at times, and I understand when you're writing a book for young adults, you know, you never want to write above their reading level or above what they can understand. But at the same time, you can't write so juvenile that it almost seems like an insult to your readers, and I feel like Holly Jackson was sort of writing that line. So my next note about this that I highlighted was kind of cringe writing, not very descriptive and feels a bit flat, just not my cup of tea when it comes to writing. So these are sort of things that were thrown into the plot that I sort of thought needed more emotional value to Pip. I don't really remember what point of view this was written in. I'm pretty sure this was written in 3rd person? I think I just like very fluffy, literary, contemporary novels. Going into a YA novel, and especially a YA novel that's supposed to be someone's debut, I guess wasn't like the best option for me. I found the topic itself to be super interesting. I love the idea that this girl sort of distantly knows this person who was involved in like I'm trying to not like spoil anything. I'm trying not to give anything away. I like the sort of thriller aspect, and this book kind of gave like Taylor Swift like cozy mystery thriller vibes, but at times it felt sort of clumsy, like Pip was a clumsy character, and I feel like with her good girl nature that didn't really line up with her behavior, and it was odd because you're watching the character struggle, but it's uncharacteristic of the character, and so you're like, are you stupid? I want to say, I'm not going to spoil anything. I did call who it would be way earlier in the book, so I'm just so smart like that. No, it doesn't leave much up to the imagination. It felt like Pip's parents didn't have a lot of character to them, nor did her brother or her dog or Ravi. To have other characters in your story be so incredibly complex, to lead these complex lives where murder is involved, crime is involved, it's crazy. And then you have on the other side of this, you yourself, or you're the reader, you're experiencing these very like bland, like one-dimensional characters. I needed something more. I wasn't very emotionally invested in what was going on. I couldn't find myself siding with Pip and caring about the things that she cared about, which was a struggle for me. Like, it almost made me feel bad that I wasn't emotionally invested in the story as much as I thought I would be. I found little nuggets of really good writing toward like the endings of chapters, and so a lot of my favorite quotes came from those chapters. So, and I would almost say it's like middle grade. I wouldn't really say it's young adult though. I couldn't be like completely on her side. And I know that's sort of what the author wanted. Like, I don't think this is supposed to be an unreliable narrator sort of book. You're supposed to really like the main character. And I just didn't. Outside of what was actually going on in the story, I felt like she had really like no character. It's hard to read a story like that for me. The most interesting people in the story were the people who were the bad characters, who were the characters that you didn't want to root for. And I sort of have a problem with that when you have a book called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder about the good girl, and that character isn't more interesting than your villain. So is that Pip's character is just explained to us and not experienced. We don't see the good girl attitude. We're just being told about it by every single character who knows her, and it's a bit annoying seeing that the author was supposed to write this great contrast between Pip's stages of this project and how she began this as a simple project among other assignments to a full obsession. A good way of exploring that would be to allow the character to spend more time on her studies and homework at the beginning and then transition into her fully ignoring all other responsibilities. Instead, the author makes the characters blowing off her work relatable, and it takes the tension and intensity behind her action away. That was sort of passionate. I can go like either way with this book. I don't know, because at one hand the writing was really good and I felt the emotions, but in times of like intense action, I was just like, I was invested, but also I was very far away. And another thing I'm irritated about is when it comes to the book is that there are virtually no stakes until the 200.5 pages where the plot thickens. I would have preferred that the character have a bit more motivation to pursue the topic of this murder outside of just having a high school capstone project due, like if she were studying in criminal justice and they had to study a case, and her grade in that course decides if she graduates or not. That has some stakes to it and some reason for Pip to step out of her comfort zone more than her relationship with Ravi and her grade, which are both reasons that are communicated to us as reasons for continuing the case and not giving up because she feels that she herself is becoming morally gray, which she is not used to and almost feels uncomfortable with. I hope we can get some more inner turmoil and see her further herself on this path away from being a good girl into doing morally gray and bad things in order to get what she wants. So I still agree with that. I still think that holds up because it's sort of just told to you the relationship that Pip has with Ravi and Sal, and the reason why she wants to go through with this project instead of you sort of realizing slowly through her eyes that this is a real thing that's happened in her community that makes her uncomfortable or makes her scared. You know, I feel like she didn't have any real solid reason to fight against that, except for the fact that she's a good girl. And even then, like, that's not being shown to us, it's being explained to us. There's so many moments where each character is like, oh, Pip does her homework early, oh, Pip asks for extra credit, and it's like, why don't I see that though? Like, why don't we see that from the beginning and see that she's like super dedicated to all of her school assignments, and then towards the end she gets way more focused on this project, and then all of her other teachers are like, why aren't you showing up to class? Or, oh, why aren't you doing this? Because there are moments where she doesn't show up to school, I'm 1000% sure, and I feel like that just wasn't talked about enough. We have multiple moments where the story itself is literally just explaining the plot to you, or explaining the evidence that they just showed to you. So not only is it showing you the evidence and showing you what's going on, the author also feels the need to explain to you why that's important or how that connects. And I feel like that also just takes the fun out of the book. You're literally just explaining what you showed us. And I found that super frustrating too. It felt like the author didn't trust the audience to come to the right conclusion. I'm kind of noticing that the book is going faster and faster when it doesn't necessarily need to. It's a little confusing. I know we're getting to the good part, but there's not enough real turmoil going on. Like, I understand the dog, and I don't want to sound like an asshole, but what is the dog's death compared to something like her brother getting kidnapped? I think this book is just written for a younger audience, so it's hard for me to understand the importance of some details. When you make a book that's a murder mystery, it is really important that the flow of your book is intact. If it is not, this can call unnecessary information to specific details in your book that may or may not be relevant to the answer to the mystery. I don't know. That's all I really wrote down about this book. I have all my like minuscule notes. I did like the romance in it. I thought it was kind of cute. But yeah, it was an okay book. I think I'd probably read it again for like an easy read, but I think it is really far too long of a book for what it is. Like, if you cut down a lot of the explanation of literally everything that's going on in the book, and instead you just show what's happening, it would probably be far more interesting. But I have a feeling that this wasn't really written for young adult. I think it was more written for like middle grade, or like elementary grade to middle grade. So yeah, that's sort of just my thoughts. I know a lot of people around me really enjoyed it, so I feel kind of bad like talking bad about it, but yeah, it was good. I gave it 4 stars. Like, it was interesting enough and it held my attention, and I read it pretty consistently, so that's better than a lot of other books that I have read. So yeah, I think it's just sort of an easy book to read, and if you sort of just want to read something that's a cozier mystery or cozier thriller, this is definitely the choice. The next book is Bunny. So Bunny was a ride, and I really do want to read it again. I don't know how to talk about this book. I genuinely don't know how to talk about this book. I don't know what to say. The best way to read this book was totally just diving in without much understanding of what is going on. This book is so much more than what meets the eye. This book is so incorrectly marketed on TikTok and simplified in so many ways that does not give Mona Awad much credit. There are so many important themes, such as the search for ambition, acceptance, home, struggling with self-worth in academia, and pretentiousness of creative liberal arts colleges because of their competitive nature. Samantha, who is the main character, being an unreliable narrator makes you relate to how she is being influenced. The book is a deliciously... Oh my god, I can't even read what I wrote. Oh, deliciously campy, thrilling, visually dynamic trip down a rabbit hole I will never forget. The poetry of Mona Awad's writing and the visuals of this book were enough to make this book one of my favorites. This book felt like entering into a completely different world, which is so true. Like, there's such distinctiveness to the characters and the way Samantha visualizes the characters that really impacts how you yourself feel the world that she's in. I feel like books with unreliable narrators are naturally pretty compelling, and I think Mona Awad did it pretty well. I'm going to say the book does take a while to get into because of Samantha's character being so dry and dreary, but that's sort of the point. You don't really like Samantha, but you sympathize with her because she is just like you. She makes mistakes, but not because she wants to hurt anyone, just because she doesn't know what she wants. She wants to belong, she wants comfort, she wants success, she doesn't want to be poor, she wants to be happy, but all of this she cannot attain through normal means. I think though the book takes a while to get into, you definitely feel so sucked into the world. I think the characters are so distinct and the world felt like something I was watching rather than something I was reading. And I think that is something that a lot of people talk about when they talk about the book, is like, oh, this would be a great movie, this would be a great show. That you are forced to almost view things that are obscure. I think it sort of has that cosmic horror element similar to the book Coraline, in which you are given the description of something that is truly unfathomable, and you're expected to make sense of that. There are so many different things in the world itself that you have to picture for yourself because you've never seen it before. It makes you subconsciously associate certain things that are similar to what you view in the book with the book. I don't know, I really liked this book. I liked Samantha, honestly, and I liked each and every character in different ways. I liked them because I hated them. I liked them because they were gross and weird, and it was kind of like watching Heathers, and I think a lot of people also compare that as well. I would love to dress up as a bunny for Halloween, honestly. I think that would be really, really fun. I just thought of that now, but I think that would be so cool to do. I gave it 5 stars. I said I literally don't know where to begin with how much I love this book. I would recommend this book to anyone who just loves chaos and death and saccharine, campy, fun, and I put 2 question marks because honestly I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I can't even say anything about the plot without giving it away, which is also true. Another book I will make a video about, Self-Fulfilled Prophecy, but one warning, don't listen to what people say about the book on TikTok. It is definitely not marketed well. I say dive in with as little expectation as possible. That's the best way to read this book. Hope this encouraged you to pick it up in some way. So that's another thing I sort of want to talk about. I did get this book spoiled for me, but I only got it spoiled for me like halfway through. You sort of expect the whole book to be about the chaos point, but it's not. This book is mostly psychological and mainly about the unreliable part of the narrator. So if you're sort of expecting more action from the book, don't. Also, I will say that I do consider this book dark academia, so if that's something that you're interested in, you should totally pick up this book. It's definitely on the more like like, there are a lot of references in this book from like early 2000s culture, so if you were alive during that time, if you were alive during like the what is it called? The 𝒟𝓃 era, if you understand that, then, you know, read this book. It's great. There's so much distinctness in the world and time period and the plot and the place that, you know, it exists in its own little bubble, and that's what I truly like about this book, because it offers you a universe that you have really probably never experienced before. Hopefully. And I think that's why this book captured my attention so much, and this was actually my choice for a book club pick, so yeah, I read this of my own volition. So when I first started reading Shadow and Bone, I didn't want to take a lot of notes on it because I didn't think I was going to need to remember like a lot of specific details, and for the most part I was right about that. The plot is generally very simple, and you go along a journey with the character Alina as she discovers that she has this power of light in a world shrouded in darkness and war, and she's sort of 𝒟𝓃𝓃𝓃's only hope. It's sort of one of those epic fantasies, but I have the Q&A version of the books, and 𝒟𝓃𝓃𝓃 personally doesn't like that people call it epic fantasy. She likes to call it 𝒟punk, which I think is kind of funny. Party City steampunk costume vibes. If you ever wanted to have that costume, then this book is for you. I think the world building is great. I love the fact that the world is based on like Russia and also Russian folklore. I think that's so fascinating, and I think that in itself would be enough for me to pick up this book if I hadn't watched the show beforehand. I will say, I didn't really like Alina's character in this book. She kind of fell flat for me, and in a first book I feel like you want your character to sort of have a little bit more agency and also be able to experience the world that they're in so that your audience themselves can experience that world with sort of fresh eyes. But I feel like 𝒟𝓃𝓃𝓃 had Alina very much sad and depressed the whole time. It's like if you started Twilight with the book New Moon instead of Twilight. You're sort of not given like a basis of liking anyone or anything because your character is so on guard. I do, however, think that all the characters are really interesting. I love the sort of dynamic of dark and light, and you should really get the Q&A versions, or at least read her Q&As, because I found them really interesting. I found a lot of her ideas about good versus evil to be really fascinating. I feel like in this book, 𝒟𝓃𝓃𝓃 really didn't like the characters that she was writing about. I think she sort of liked them, but I think she was probably more excited to write the second book, which I personally found a lot more interesting. If you like the show The Great, which I really like that show, it's one of my favorite shows ever, you would really like this book. I felt naturally just inclined to really like this book because it was about like Russian culture. The book itself is way more like dark than the show. I think the book sort of gives off more of a dark, gruesome energy. I like the Darkling in this book, and I'm not saying I like him as in like, I don't think he's a bad person. I think he's an awful person, but I'm just saying I like the aspect of his character. I also sort of like seeing Alina grow as a character into the person that she eventually becomes in the second book, Sleeping Storm. Baghra was by far my favorite character. I also really like establishing the dynamics within the court system and sort of how that works, which also is written way better in the second book. That's what I'm saying. Like, I really do like Shadow and Bone as an introduction, but I think Siege and Storm is by far more interesting than Shadow and Bone. I think you should read Shadow and Bone so you can read Siege and Storm. There's an odd, like, undertone of sexual assault. That's something that you personally would feel too uncomfortable about. I would skip these parts, and I feel like it's tough for a YA novel to tackle these topics, and I really don't think they should be tackled as much as they are. I feel like it is such a huge, like, point in YA novels, especially at the time when this came out. And so reading a book like this again and hearing these situations happen to characters was incredibly, it made me incredibly angry. And so if that's something that would make you angry or make you even the slightest bit uncomfortable to the point of not wanting to read it, I would really encourage you to look up the content warnings, or if you want, I'll actually go ahead and put the pages that these things occur, or these conversations occur, so that you can read freely. I really like the chapter where she sort of like pushes Mal to the side in her brain and actually starts using her power and feels like she has control over it. I think it's super cool. I love women's empowerment. Honestly, I think that Shadow and Bone was really, really good. So yeah, I'd really recommend it to anyone. So the next book that I read was Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love. This is a fan fiction that was written by Is This Self-Care? It's also accessible on AO3. On Goodreads, it says that it is 593 pages. I don't know how true that is, but if it is true, that's so crazy that I'm reading longer fan fictions than I'm reading with actual books. I think that's so insane. I saw people creating paperback versions of it and assumed that it must be very good if it was worthy of that. Yeah, so I actually followed a few different accounts who were making like binding videos where they were making paperback versions of this specific fanfiction, and I was like, wow, that must be a really good fanfiction if they're doing all of that. And they had like pictures inserted in the text, and I was like, wow, that's really, really cool. I've never seen anyone do that before. And they were really praising the fanfiction. So, but yeah, I started reading it mainly because of that. I had never heard of it before, and I was so pleasantly surprised. It's not super descriptive because I sort of wanted to leave a bit more up to the imagination, I guess, because I didn't know anything about this fanfiction before I jumped into it. This book perfectly combines the already established wizarding world and muggle world and amplifies them almost like an AU. It engages the reader in politics, STEM, and mythology and legends in a way I have experienced in no other book. This book kept me hooked through the perspective of Draco Malfoy. This book is hilarious, spellbinding, and positively satisfying as we enter dual worlds across the globe, experiencing the magical and muggle cultures of holidays and seasons changing as we view a love blossom. That was such a run-on sentence. So both the characters, Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy, are 30 in this book, which I found super satisfying. But there's something so sweet about the comfort of reading a book about people who fall in love in their 30s. Instead of putting like a direct quote, I put my favorite scene is the trivia night with Draco and Hermione. Which, yeah, it really puts these characters into unique situations that sort of functions as an AU, but not really. It still ties you very much to the wizarding world, which is a familiar world for fans, and then also ties you to the muggle world, which is obviously a normal human world, which is also familiar to fans. So it's super interesting, and then it adds like layer upon layer of difference in the lore that just it makes it so much more fascinating, and I almost would love to believe that this is canon. Instead of it feeling like wholly book Hermione and Draco or movie Hermione and Draco, it feels like the author really captured their essence, and I think that's what matters the most. I'm getting really tired. I'm almost done with my tea. Let me chug it. Yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but my voice started hurting like maybe a couple minutes into this video. And I'm actually super exhausted because, I don't know, there's something about needing to talk about so many books in a row that is nauseating to me. Once again, my name is Amanda. This channel is called Novelty Books, and it is time for me to go Betty bye. I hope you have an amazing day. I hope you have an amazing night, and I'll see you in the next video.